Hi, this is Paul. Last week, or maybe a week and a half or so ago, I did a conversation with Benjamin Boyce. He's got another YouTube channel, and Ben had talked to Esther O'Reilly, and then he talked to me, and we talked about Christianity, and I thought the conversation went very well. And just yesterday, or yesterday or the day before, turn on my lights, I saw that he posted a very interesting car video entitled Varieties of Religious Experience, which is the same title as a William James book that I read when probably my guess is Benjamin is in his early 20s. That's probably about the time that I had read William James' Varieties of Religious Experience. At that point in my life, I haven't talked a lot about my own journey. I grew up, I'm a pastor's son in Paterson, New Jersey. I went to Christian school, which was part of being Christian Reformed back in those days. And then I went to Calvin College, I was not a rebellious kid. I was a very dutiful kid and just kind of went along with the program. Went to Calvin College, and at that point I decided, well, if I'm going to believe this stuff, if I'm going to live this stuff, and this is kind of typical what happens when you go to college, if I'm going to live this stuff, I want to think it through for myself. That's, after all, what any self-respecting American with enough left brain decides that they want to do for themselves. So I went to Calvin College and decided if I wanted to live as a Christian, if I wanted to be a Christian, I should at least read the Bible, probably in a different way than I had read it before, and decide if this was something that I wanted to do with my life. And that then sent me on a spiritual journey or pilgrimage of my own. And that led me to various different corners I played around with. I didn't do any psychedelics in the early 1980s. A student at Calvin College wasn't really going to do much LSD. But I was exploring Pentecostalism, I was looking at Buddhism, I was exploring meditation, I was reading the Bible in a much more serious way for myself. I was looking at theology a little bit differently, probably with a little bit more of a skeptical posture to see if this is something that I bought, that I believed, that I thought I should invest my life in. These are all really good things to do, period. But for many of us, when we go to college, so I guess I was my late teens. I went to college when I was 18. This is something to do in your late teens, early 20s, to explore the world for yourself and try different things and so on and so forth. That's part of what, at least in our culture, college is for. And so I did that and started, at least in my own estimation, started thinking for myself instead of doing what my parents told me. Blah 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 blah. That's what you do. This is part of growing up and differentiating and all of those good things. So I was delighted to find Benjamin's video, Variety of Religious Experience, because it was then that I read William James and the Varieties of Religious Experience, because I was very curious about mystical experiences and supernatural experiences and miracles. And like I said, I started to explore more of the Pentecostal side of Christianity, tongue speaking, faith healing. I didn't do any snake handling. There wasn't a lot of snake handling going on in Grand Rapids, Michigan at the time. So that was the stage of life that I was in, and I was exploring a lot of these things. And probably the most important thing that I was doing was thinking critically. I was evaluating the Dutch Calvinism that I had been raised in, and I was evaluating my particular Dutch Calvinism was a little bit unusual because it had been formed in the middle of an African American community, and that tradition was part of my experience, and the racial reconciliation story was a deep part of my experience, given the kinds of things that I grew up with in Paterson, New Jersey, and the ideas about justice and good news for the poor and what hope did someone who grew up poor and black in Paterson, New Jersey, really have in the United States. I mean, all these kinds of issues were the kinds of things that I was wrestling with I graduated high school in 81. So it was the early 80s that I was all through the 80s in many ways, because I've never stopped thinking about these things, and all through college and then seminary and then to the Dominican Republic, and experiencing how the Haitians lived and the kinds of things that they had to deal with, and the kind of religious experiences that they had had, and the kind of ways that they approached Christianity, so on and so forth. So this path that Benjamin begins articulating, and I know there are some comments, or the comments in the video, I know some comments are like, you shouldn't be doing this in the car, and that's a good point. Distracted driving, but I also know the drive through southern Oregon and northern California. There's just not a lot out there, and he has to stop at the fruit check-in place to see if he's bringing any fruit that could have bugs into California that will threaten our fruit industry. And so I just really enjoyed this, and it was, I don't know if it was the camera setting that he had, but the windows, I just thought it was a lovely video, and I loved his rambling and his stream of consciousness, and how he's kind of putting it out there. So I decided, I want to make a video about this one. So I hope sometimes when I mention people in videos, people get their feelings hurt, and then they write me and they get their feelings hurt. And I'm sorry. Most of the time when I mention someone in a video, my assumption is that they're big boys and big girls, and they're used to sharing ideas and saying things back and forth. And yeah, we all do get our feelings hurt, but people say stuff about me. You're not going to be on YouTube if you're particularly thin-skinned. And again, YouTube is a place for people with not a lot to lose. So Ben put this out, so let's have at it, because I thought it was a delightful and interesting video. Oops, I'm all the way at the end. Hang on. 2019. Here we go.
Of establishing connections with people who are studied in various faiths. And so I want to set the ground rules for my own, where I'm coming from, so that people who are interacting with me are curious, what is my take? They'll have something to connect with. Now,
I just love the look of this video. It's probably very foggy out there, or he set the camera, because later it's a little bit clearer. He obviously edited the video, and so just as someone who is making videos on the cheap and really quick and really efficiently, I saw this, and many times I'm driving in the car and I'm thinking, man, I should just set up my phone, because I'm having all these thoughts, especially when you're driving through the middle of nowhere, which is Northern California. I mean, I live in Sacramento. It's kind of the bottom of Northern California, because once you drive north of Sacramento on the 5, oh, baby, you got Redding up there, but there's just not a lot up there, especially once you get north of Redding. It's beautiful, beautiful country. You get to see Mount Shasta, and this time of year it's cold, and there's snow on the ground in some places probably, and it can be foggy. And so I saw this video, and I just had all kinds of warm, fuzzy memories of long drives that I've had as someone his age, when I was driving back and forth from between Grand Rapids and Paterson, New Jersey for college vacations and so on and so forth. So I love this video. And he's just kind of putting himself out there, and he's saying, I'm going to think about religion, and I'm going to think about the big questions in life, and I'm going to think about all of this stuff, and I want to process it, and I'm going to be talking to people, so I'm going to put this out there so people I'm talking to have kind of a benchmark to know where I'm at. So, and I've already talked to them, but to me, this was just fun. This is, as a pastor, this is what I do, because people talk to me about this stuff all the time. And to have someone just kind of lay all their cards out on the table in such a transparent way, and he's not just doing it in my office to me alone, he's doing it to the whole world on YouTube. I thought, this is too much fun. So let's get into it.
I'm going to do several disclaimers throughout this. The first disclaimer is that I'm going to be embarking on some language that when people speak about it's never a bad idea to be skeptical of people who talk about this. It's never a bad idea to question and to doubt people who begin to speak about this kind of stuff. That's an absolutely healthy response. It's very necessary.
So this is kind of our cultural default, which is the same cultural default that I began my own journey with, and this is skepticism. Now, again, I'm going to give the disclaimer. Some of you are going to complain that this video right now has less than 2,000 views, so many of you haven't seen it. Go to his channel, and I like Ben's videos, and I know he's doing a lot of his. He came out of Evergreen, and he had that experience with that Brett Weinstein, the Brett Weinstein episode. He had that experience, and that clearly has set him on his way, and he's using his video channel to process a lot of these issues that the IDW is working through, and that's what Ben's doing. And for some of you who listen to my channel, you're really into that. Others of you who listen to my channel, you're not into that at all, but that's what Ben's doing on his channel. But he's great fun to listen to. Again, in many ways, YouTube is this weird Truman show, but there's lots of us Trumans out there, and we're watching each other, and we're wondering, how's it going to end? Where's Ben going to end up in terms of his spiritual journey and his path of discovery and all of these things? So it's just great fun to watch. But this move that he talks about here is kind of the personal exploration. I'm going to bring up this course that I use often, not because it's the final say on philosophy and religion in the West, but Philip Carey's great courses. Now, again, why do I use this and not a book? Partly because if you're watching my YouTube channel, you're probably already an auditory learner. Some of you do read a lot of books, but some of you don't read many books at all. And so that's part of the reason that I do use a lot of auditory materials here. And I really recommend Philip Carey's Philosophy and Religion in the West, part of the Great Courses series. I got mine through Audible. I'm a big Audible user. Audible, why aren't you sponsoring my channel? Where is Audible? I use your stuff all the time. Maybe if they sponsor my channel, they'll be taking down my videos from YouTube. But I really enjoy this course by Philip Carey, because he's got these nice half-hour segments where he walks through just all the major figures and contextualizes them nicely. And Philip Carey has solid credentials. He's got his degree from Yale, and he teaches at Eastern University, and which is a Christian university in the Mennonite tradition. Now, those of you who've been watching my channel know, I just talked to Julian recently. Julian is part of that Anabaptist branch of the Protestant Reformation. Eastern University is part of that branch. So Philip Carey is processing is basically has a terrific course, and he talks about Descartes here as in terms of this embrace of skepticism, but also the turn towards the subject. So it's saying, okay, I'm going to use skepticism, and the West has followed Descartes ever since he made this move. I'm going to use skepticism to try to find out the truth. I'm going to use skepticism to debunk is not the right word. I'm going to use skepticism to clear off the detritus of hundreds and thousands of years of talking, and I'm going to get down to the foundation. I'm going to get down to the core. I'm going to get down to the bottom, and I'm going to see what's true. Now, this is the fact that we make this move so instinctively talks about the fact that none of us are actually doing this within a vacuum. That even the process by which we imagine we are going to discover the truth is itself culturally formed, and we are doing so within the stream of Western philosophy. And this is so embedded into the culture that we so naturally do it, and when we do it, in a sense, we think, oh, this is like a great idea. I should use skepticism to clear off all of this stuff on top, to really get to the bottom, to really know the truth. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing to use skepticism. My observation is just that this too is formed by the culture. And it's not dissimilar to Brett Weinstein and Sam Harris's moral formation, that in some ways they don't look at the credentials of their moral formation. They don't ask penetrating questions about, where did I arrive at these assumptions, basic assumptions of what morality are? And then Sam Harris in particular goes on to basically say, well, I don't get them from Christianity. And anybody from outside the system would say, nah, you're not working in a clean room here, buddy. These very much are downstream from Christianity, but not just Christianity, downstream from a lot of things. And that's sort of how history works. History is this broad river that floods regularly, that carries with it all of this stuff. I think about this scene in My Brother, is it the movie with My Brother, Where Art Thou? Is that it? No, I can't think of it. This is why I should bring up things on the fly. But, there's this great scene. There's this great flood in the South. There's all this stuff just floating down the river. Well, that's what history's like. And we're born into this river, and we're raised in this river. But ironically, we're not terribly self-aware of how this stuff is clinging to us, of the food that we're eating, of how things get inside of us, and how we are formed. Often about the only way to see that is to step out of our particular currents in the stream over to another part of the stream where other things have had a different mixture. And then you begin to look back at your own culture and say, wow, there's, we really bit hard onto Descartes there, and we really liked that, and that really became so assumed in terms of part of our formation. So there's a lot of Descartes in here, and there's a lot of turning towards the subject here, and Philip Carey will get into that then when he gets into Kant. And I was tempted to play some of Philip Carey's video with Kant, but this is going to be long enough without taking 20 minutes of I forget what chapter, his first chapter on Kant. Kant is so important, Philip Carey says that he has 2 chapters on Kant. Again, I do recommend this great courses if you want to kind of have a nice overview of philosophy and religion in the West and their developments. So, but Kant gets into this and gets into the a priori structures, because as Jordan Peterson kept trying to point out to Sam Harris, and Sam Harris kept saying, yeah, I know, but Jordan Peterson kept listening to him and said, no, I really don't think you do know. No, I really don't think you do know. You're not just seeing the world with naive eyes. You're not just evaluating the world with your people. Someone keeps asking me what the monarchical vision is. The monarchical vision is the vision from nowhere. This is the imagination that the world is a place of objects, and I just apprehend the objects directly. And there's another video I want to get into later this week who does a little bit of philosophy, where Kant really, along the lines following Descartes, really starts to wrestle with, well, what really can we see? And really, how do we know? And, of course, Kant arrives at says that religion is really more about morality. And surprise, surprise, Kant's morality looks a lot like Christian morality of the 19th century. Who would have known? The 18th and 19th century, the era in which he lived and worked and was worked through. This is how we do. We are formed morally by our surroundings, and Jonathan Haidt will get into all of that in terms of the moral taste buds, so on and so forth. But we're going to prioritize. See, now, when Benjamin gets into this, and Esther picked this up in her conversation with Benjamin, didn't really come through too much in my conversation with Benjamin, a little bit, but he prioritizes experience. And this too is kind of the common move that most are making right now in the 20th century. It's connected with this string since the Reformation that I've gone through in a number of my videos, where the Protestant Reformation, that was Renaissance humanism, there's really turned towards texts. And so, for example, if you want to know about God, you study the text, you study the Church Fathers, you study the Bible. Of course, the Protestant Reformation prioritizes the Bible. If you wanted to study physics, for example, you study Aristotle, and you learn Aristotle from the text. after the Protestant Reformation, after these wars of religion, there's a skepticism regarding texts. And people then turns to, well, what if you don't have texts to depend on? You look at reason and empiricism. And so these are kind of the two default options. And so philosophy comes roaring in, and philosophy in some ways displaces religion as the West is trying to get beyond wars of religious pluralism. And so then philosophy says, well, let's look at reason and let's look at empiricism. And these are two ancient options that you can find in Plato and Aristotle. And these are two options then that people begin to say, this is how we can get beyond religious pluralism. And now haunting some of Benjamin's quest in this is in fact religious pluralism. This comes up with Jonathan Peugeot's conversation with David Fuller and Rebel Wisdom. This is so deeply a part of the Western project right now, because right away Christianity continues in some ways to have its top seat at the table. But people say, yeah, but what about Buddhism? And what about all the factions in Christianity? And all the Christians can't agree. And then the Roman Catholic Church, in a sense, says, yeah, you Protestants, that's what you did with your Reformation. And Luther thought he could take reason and the text and come out with one thing. But we know you need a magisterium. You need a church to tell you what the text says. And the Protestants say, yeah, but then you put this administration, this bureaucracy, which is prone to corruption. And in the Middle Ages, we saw terrible corruption in the church. And so now suddenly you have this big conversation between the Roman Catholics and the Protestants, and the Orthodox are kind of back there and saying, yeah, you Roman Catholics with your popes, you did that before us. And so then people are sitting back watching the squabbling and saying, they can't even agree on the truth. How are we supposed to know? They don't even agree on biblical interpretations. How are we supposed to know? So then you're going to solve this by taking the Bible literally, and that's going to answer all the questions. But then they see that you've got all these groups taking the Bible literally, and that isn't solving anything. So it's like, well, what is truth? You're back to Pontius Pilate's question. And so religious pluralism is haunting this. And then in philosophy, I got to get a drink of water. This is going to be long. So then via philosophy, you hope to attain a ground that is not cluttered with centuries of religious warfare and argumentation about ultimate things. Well, how can we arrive at that? Well, after they turned away from the text, after the Protestant Reformation, they turned towards reason and experience. And so philosophers, again, Plato and Aristotle, this is an old tactic to try to find consensus and uniformity. And when we find consensus and uniformity, then we think we will arrive at truth. And part of this is revelatory in terms of human beings, because part of how we understand truth is the thing that everyone around us agrees on. So there's a sociological component to this idea of truth for us as well. And that's why religious pluralism is so devastating among us when it comes to these questions of truth. So how can we arrive at truth? Well, clockmaker universe, Isaac Newton, and most of the people of his age, deeply committed Christians. If you want to learn about physics, how do you discover physics? Well, you can measure gravity. So this little dongle here, this thing is hard. Fabric and the dongle are made. Oh, I got a stapler here too. See, if I cleaned my office, I wouldn't have all these illustrations here. So there's gravity and there's mass, and Newton can begin to discover these things and to work on these things. And here's the thing: if you can measure it, and if it's available to all of us, and if we all get the same answers all the time, now we have truth. This is what we've been looking for. Now we have a basis upon which to agree, and this is the promise of science. Now, it's fairly easy when even though the big G constant, as oh, Rupert Sheldrake, why do you come around and bother us with questions about changes in the constants where the speed of light changes and big G gravity varies and oh, Einstein, this time-space idea where time is changed by gravity, you troublers of certainty. Well, science still promises, well, if we can get beyond religious pluralism, then we can arrive at truth. And so this is then the quest behind natural theology. If you go back to N.T. Wright's Gifford lectures, which you can find on YouTube, about natural theology, and how in the past I've really said in many ways what Jordan Peterson is doing is natural theology. The desire behind natural theology is to arrive at the kind of certainty we experience in Newtonian mechanics in theology, because the frustration with science when it comes to these questions is that, Sam Harris, I'm talking to you, we've been unable to arrive at consensus via natural theology. And so this is the desire that if our religion can be like Newtonian mechanics, then finally we can answer the major questions of life. Then finally we can have a common morality that we can all agree on and hold each other accountable to. And then finally we can answer these questions definitively about a God. And then, because stalking in these questions behind God is, well, if there is a God, he might have some ideas about how he wants us to behave, and what if I get it wrong, and what if there is an afterlife, and what if he does punish me, and so on and so on and so on and so on. Okay, so huge history behind all of this stuff that's going on. And so Benjamin comes in here and says, well, I'm going to begin with skepticism. Okay, well, he is following the process. He is following the set trajectory of what, I don't know how old, maybe I'm, Ben, if I'm saying you're younger than you really are, I am apologizing, or I'm saying you're welcome, depending on how old you are, because when you get to my age, I mean, my wife was, I won't tell you what my wife said, but when you get to my age, people like to worry about how old they are. Me, I don't care. How long am I going to live? Who knows? So this is the project that most people start on, and this is where Benjamin begins, and I just ran through a little history of why this goes. So let's jump back to the video, and let's have him continue.
Because what this stuff does, what religion is, it in a way, it's deep programming. It's how you plug yourself into life on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment level, on a relationship level between the people that you interact with, on a societal level, like in your town, and then on a historical level, as in, what does this all mean? What is the whole project that we're doing or involved in? And so
yeah, religion is deep programming. And, well, and again, the point I just finished made is you've already been programmed. And there's been a lot of religion that's already in your program. And there's been a lot of philosophy. And there's been a lot of culture. And so even though the desire that Descartes has and the process that Descartes employs, that almost everybody's been following since Descartes, there's stuff built into that too. And the irony is that everyone employs where Descartes started, but hardly anyone goes where Descartes goes, because Descartes says, okay, I think, therefore I am, cognito ergo sum. Here I am. I'm thinking. I exist. I know that. And then, of course, Descartes, well, God wouldn't let me be fooled. And, of course, everybody today says, what do you mean God wouldn't let you be fooled? That kind of built-in assumption about God's goodness by virtue now of religious pluralism, we look at and say, nah, can't go there, can't do that. That's not only, that's Jesus smuggling on a grand scale, and we won't have that. So we have to take steps back and in a sense, the history of philosophy since Descartes has been taking steps back. And, well, every time you take a step back, you still have to live, Peterson's point. Making real choices in life demands that you, well, even if I don't have everything figured out, today is today, and living in this world of things and values and other people demands that I make decisions in terms of how to treat people and what to do. So I just have to act before I even have the whole thing figured out. In fact, I may never have the whole thing figured out because our skepticism is that deep and pluralism is that disturbing. So, well, I got to act, but okay, none of this God won't let me be fooled stuff, Descartes. I ain't buying that. So, religion is deep programming. Well, that's true. And you've already been programmed. And this, again, is the point that I keep bringing up in Brett Weinstein's things, is that you don't have a monarchical vision. You don't have a clean room. You don't have an epistemic clean room. Once you interact with this space, you've already contaminated it. And you have to bring you and all of your assumptions into it. There is no neutral space. You are not able to see the world as such without bias, without you. This is Kant's main point, and this is the main point that Jordan Peterson hammers and hammers and hammers and hammers at Sam Harris for 4 nights, and Sam Harris at the end of it just kind of shrugs and keeps on with his thing, and Peterson keeps saying, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You do not have an epistemic clean room. Once you engage in this quest, you bring to it all of the stuff that you have and that are built into you, and it's built into your approach. And we see that clearly because we started with Descartes. Where did we get Descartes from? We didn't make him up on our own. You might not have even heard the name René Descartes, but you've absorbed it because you've watched everybody else and you've watched other people do it, and you thought, wow, they really have status. Wow, they really seem smart. Wow, they really seem cool. This is what everyone does. So I'm going to be a skeptic. That's the way to do it in the West.
When people enter into discussing this, what they are doing is providing you templates to organize your life. And
yep, that's exactly what we're doing. And now we've got a consumerist layer that comes in and says, all right, well, you got the Pentecostal Christian package. Well, you're going to be going through Reading pretty soon, Ben, so you can stop at Bethel Church, and they've got their whole Pentecostal shtick available to you, and they'll have your easy answers. And you can find maybe a little fundamentalist Baptist church, and they'll give you their answers. And then the Roman Catholics, and they'll say, have you watched Bishop Barron? He is so smooth. And he is. Oh, gosh. I'm nowhere near as smooth as Bishop Barron. Look at my office is even a mess. And then the Buddhists will say, well, you can have direct experience by meditation. And the Jungians will jump in and say, oh, did you see him? Did you see him on that TV interview? He doesn't know, or he doesn't believe, he knows. And on and on. And then the New Agers that, well, we're just, on and on and on. The world is full of people offering you platforms and packages and saying, you're a religious consumer. I'm a religious vendor of wares. Take my product. You'll be happy. You'll be fulfilled. You'll be great. And everybody's got their upsides and downsides. And everybody's trying to maximize their upsides and limit their downsides. And so on and so forth. That's the game, right? From a consumer point of view.
You have to be really smart about how you organize your life. Because ultimately it's your own responsibility.
Oh, there's a little bit of West in there too. It's up to you. You have to be your own. And again, this is some of the irony of, let's say, the Sam Harris position, because do you have a free agent? Are you a free agent? Do you have free will? Are you actually an agent, or are you really just working out your programming? Brett Weinstein.
You live your life. Ultimately, it's your life. Now, in my own experience, this world is put together in a very tight way. This material reality is formed out of very dense particulates of forces, but it's basically all energy, but it's very, very dense. It's a very dense form of energy.
Now we're getting into some fun stuff. because now we're taking the move into his worldview. And materialism, now I haven't done a lot of research, but he seems to live in Portland because that's where his stories are coming from, and he's traveling to California. Maybe he's traveling for family stuff. I don't know. But boy, if you live out west, yeah, matter's not really as cool as energy. Energy is all about, you know, I'm watching their energy, and I'm feeling her energy, and I'm seeing his energy. Energy is a really popular world, and we have E equals MC squared, so matter is just other forms of energy, and we know that. So, but at the same time, the tale he's about to tell is pretty much a materialist tale, and but he's intuiting, I think, some lurking doubts around it. So let's have him continue.
And what has happened over time is that this energy has been organized into more and more interactive states.
Now, when you listen to him say this, and this is very, very common, he's using passive, basically the voice of passive agency, because this is what we do in the West with respect to where this all comes from. And if you use passive agency, you can kind of leave room for people who think God was doing it to say, this is God doing it, and leave room for people who, if you listen to the materialist and the atheist materialist, who will say, well, we can't really know God did it, and so we're skeptical, and you don't really need a God to do it, so we'll just use the passive voice. But the thing is, you can't get around in the English language this talk of agency. There's actually no way to do it. So genes want something, and memes want something, and gravity wants something, and it's just very interesting how our language does not afford, to some degree, the atheism that certain groups. I'm not saying Ben is doing it, because later he's going to talk about God quite a bit. So, but our language doesn't really afford the kind of atheism that people are promoting. So just listen to all the times that he. Why do I tell you to listen to it? Because again, what I'm doing here, what I'm doing with Ben, is what I do as a pastor, and what I'm basically saying is usually what I'm thinking in my head when I listen to people talk like this, because if he were actually in my office and he were talking like this, I wouldn't be so rude as to interrupt his every word and to monopolize the conversation. And again, if you think I'm monopolizing this conversation, just go to his channel and watch him, or have this video on one side and have me on the other side, so you can listen to him and then you can jump back and forth. However you want to do it. This is my shtick.
So we can go from like the whole Big Bang thing, and start with like just the formless matter was eventually formed into molecules, which were eventually formed into stars, which eventually formed into planets, and then the planets densified into the materials like we have at our planet, and then upon our planet, that matter was worked on and worked on and worked on and worked on.
Worked on and worked on and worked on. By whom? By what? Causes, formal cause, patterns. Go see my video about Peugeot and patterns, so on and so forth. We don't know what formed it. Why do these forms take this shape? Why do the laws of physics, why are they as they are? We in a sense see them third hand, because something forms, then we see the material residue, and then we look at the patterns of residue, and then we call that science. We call, those are the laws of physics. We've just discovered them.
In an incredibly slow, incredibly patient, and incredibly creative, and also
patient, creative. Those are awfully anthropomorphic.
Very critical, like both creative and critical manner, to form various levels of life, such as what you can go into Dawkins and you can see his whole story about the gene, about the.
Let me check my. Oh, yeah, I wanted to bring in, God equals the whole show, and I think, Benjamin, you should definitely read C.S. Lewis's Miracles, because the problem that you have with a materialist, I'm not saying you're a materialist, because you're also kind of a theist. You said that to Esther. The difficulty with materialism is that if we're merely products of these impersonal forces, then we ourselves can't claim agency. And C.S. Lewis walks through that in the first number of chapters of Miracles, and I walked through that in my videos that I did quite a while ago now. Oops.
Selfish gene was basically just have this clay that eventually formed these replicators that eventually formed containers, which eventually replicated and formed other containers, and so on and so forth. It's a beautiful freaking story.
Now remember, Ben was at Evergreen University to go there to study under Brett Weinstein. And so that's, his credentials in the IDW, he comes by them honestly. Now, I want to mention some of where what Ben and I share here is that the default assumption here is that we are formed. We are formed by processes, or if you're Canadian, processes. And the question is, by what? The real dangerous question is, by whom? Because is there agency working on these? What is defining the patterns? What is defining the shapes? And we don't know. Now, I agree that we are certainly products of forces we can observe and track. There's way too much evidence, and I think this is actually built into Christianity, that we live in a stable universe where there are forces that we can track. We can do history, we can do science, we can do all of these things. The world is not simply illusion. Okay? That's the argument that says science could only have arisen from a Judeo-Christian worldview because the world is stable, and the stability of the world is there because of the stability of God. All right, that's where that argument goes. Now, Christians and atheists alike will say we are formed by processes, and we are formed by forces that we can track and we can make predictions. The world is stable. But here's the big question. But are there forces we might not be completely aware of? And that's a really big question, because in a sense, implicit in a lot of scientism is the assertion that we already know the forces, and the universe is closed. It's a closed system. Now they will very readily say, with their own eschatology, oh, but there'll be more that we find. Well, now you've kind of given up your game, because, well, how do you know there won't be a who in what you find? Well, and right there, the line is exposed. And I think one of the most honest atheists about that is Thomas Nagel, who notes that the project up until now was successful because we took subjectivity out of it, because we acted like we could see the world through a monarchical vision, through an epistemic clean room, and we acted like we can know all the variables. Now, in some simple operations, it's pretty clear we know the significant variables because prediction and outcomes seem, at least to us, solid enough, now we bring in the pragmatist, solid enough to live and to depend on things. And this is the basis of technology, that electrolysis will predictably yield hydrogen and oxygen out of water. And that's good. But systems get complex very fast, and the fudge factor starts to come in. And then you've got bothersome people like Rupert Sheldrake sniffing around the edges saying, why do you need an office to manage constants? Shouldn't they be constant? Say, yeah, but speed of light changes. Well, why? And well, big G gravity, that changes too, so we have to keep measuring it. Well, why? Well, does this put the stability of God into jeopardy? Well, God is the kind of idea that affords variability in the way that a lot of the 19th century materialists and how they imagine laws of physics to be don't leave quite as much wiggle room. And of course, now you've got Einstein and all of these other big questions coming in, and physics gets a lot weirder than it seemed to be under Newton, and the weirdness doesn't seem to be going away, and that leads us to, well, what should we really think? But again, this leads open the question of, there are forces we might not be completely aware of, and so then we have questions of patterns, of persons, and we can't answer those questions. So now we not only have religious pluralism, but in a sense we have pluralisms of other more disturbing kinds if we put our hope in scientism. Well, we'll get into Ben's hierarchy in a minute, as he'll go into it.
It's also terrible because it gives you the sense that there's nothing at the helm, that this is all accidental, that this is nothing but matter, just material force that has happened to form in such a way. And that might be true. I think you're going to have to interact with that on your own. But insofar as I understand it, there's different energies, and those energies stack upon each other. And what we are as creatures is we're built out of matter, and then we're built out of like this kind of vegetable kind of stuff, like which you can think of as just brute urge.
Now he's getting into desire. Okay, now give Ben some latitude here. He's talking in the car as he's driving through Southern Oregon, Northern California. This is a total stream of consciousness, and so he doesn't have an outline in front of him, and he's working through this. But now we're getting into, okay, so you've got, why does stuff want? That's a really important question. And actually later, I think he's gonna, beyond what I'm gonna play actually for this video, he's gonna wander, I think, probably into some stuff that he's picked up in the river from Augustine. But
if you look at the plants in life, what they do is they eat and they don't move, but they consume and they flourish. And then atop of that is a subtler form of life which roams around and has various forms of intentionality, which intentionality you can think of as instincts.
And I'd just like to bring in, okay, I brought up C.S. Lewis's Miracles. When you get into instincts, you should really read The Abolition of Man, which is a book that I've spent some time into, C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, because C.S. Lewis basically addresses the question of instincts and intentionality and agency, which you might find really helpful. Abolition of Man is a very short book.
And then you have like this multiplicity of different instincts, such as birds and reptiles and kitties and doggies and giraffes and elephants and all that stuff, right? All these different variations of that intentional sphere. On top of that, though, is this extra thing, and that extra thing is what man is. And another way of thinking about this is that
now he's just crossed the line from Sam Harris, because he created a line, and so you have the question of, is man on another side of a line from the plants and the animals that seem to have some intentionality or instinct, and so now we're getting into free will and agency, real agency.
If you make soup, the soup, of course, is made out of matter. Everything in that soup is matter, is material. You have the water, you have the salts, you have all the proteins, you have all the vegetables, right? And then you have like the richer proteins, the meats, which is analogous to the animal matter. And then on top of that, what makes the soup a soup is this human force.
What makes soup soup, why you don't just find it in the wild, is what I say, colonization. C.S. Lewis in Miracles will say reason colonizes nature. Reason colonizes matter. Now, why some people have kind of pushed back on the use of the word colonizing. I get it from C.S. Lewis in his book Miracles. I don't think it's a bad word. Now, there's a moral taint to the word colonization. I understand that, and that moral taint is in many ways credible, and okay, I get that. But every time, in a sense, what you do when you build a stapler is you colonize the properties inherent in carbon and iron to make steel, or with electricity to make aluminum. You colonize, and why I use the word colonize is that you basically bend these forces to your will. And it's a lot of bending forces to our will to go on. Hey, Stanley, you can support this channel too. Here I'm using your stapler as a this is my product placement scheme. Yeah, Patreon's going under, baby. Man's got to figure out a living. So we basically colonize the stuff of nature, domestication of animals. It's another example of what I'd say colonizing. We take the stuff of nature and we bend it to our will, and we do so via technology. Okay, that's what I mean by colonizing. And so in a sense, a soup is colonizing. Now, if you've listened to my talks about glory, you'll also notice that a soup is glorious. The great chef is a sub-creator, and Benjamin's going to talk about this because Benjamin's been talking. He and I share a lot of cultural similarities here, and so we're pulling from parts of the same currents in the stream. And so what happens when we make a soup is that we bring glory, we create glory into this world, and that's where this colonization and this agency, and this is what we're doing. And again, C.S. Lewis's Miracles, first number of chapters really go into this nicely. Now Lewis loves Plato, and so Lewis is a bit of a Platonist. And so Lewis says that it's actually reason that's happening, and our use of reason is actually a bit of God's, the question of the image of God in us. Lewis would use reason. There's been a lot of candidates for articulating what the image of God in us is, and reason's been a long-standing one, and it's one that Lewis uses. We use reason to colonize the minerals of the earth and the forces of nature, as we call them, and we colonize them in the form of this stapler, and we use this staple to put staples in papers, and we colonize and we bring order out of the chaos of multiple papers, and on and on and on. And this is what we do.
Which is distinct from the other forces. The human force isolates, extracts, and then recombines everything else.
And I call that colonization.
And the way in which the human force does this, the way in which humans do this, is through our thought and through our feeling. We have a very subtle...
Okay, now we're getting a little bit into Ian McGilchrist and left brain, right brain, and reason and intuition, and the master and his emissary, and we'll talk about that as we go into this a little bit further too.
A subtle sense, spectrum of feelings, and a very subtle instrument of mind. Now, those instruments are absolutely essential. Every single thing that builds us up is absolutely essential for us living in this world. But that's not all. What religion is, like I said, was a way of tying us together into the moments of how we behave towards reality, how we behave towards each other, how we behave in societies, and then how we behave in history, right? And all that stuff is formed out of the heart and the mind. That's all attenuated to the emotions and the intellect. But within every single... Okay, I'm at the border, so hold on.
He's got to do the fruit check. And for those of you who don't live out here, California has a lot invested in grapes. Don't be bringing your grapes with little fruit flies and stuff into the state, boy. We're going to check you at the border, because don't be messing with our grape industry. Because we got wine to make that we're going to sell all over the world, so it's got to do the fruit stop. Again, this. I love this video. I love this video.
So, where was I? I'm in California now. I don't have any fresh fruit.
Woohoo!
No, I don't have like a McDonald's sandwich, which I refuse to eat.
Then why did you buy it? I love this video.
So that the religion is a product of the human level, but it's not.
See, now we're getting to the definition of religion. This is another big whole thing, and now he's going to basically take a turn with Jonathan Haidt and my friend Adam over at Think Club. And religion is what we do. It binds and blinds. This religion is how we form tribes, and we need tribes to be productive in this world, and so on and so forth. So he's going to go down there a little bit.
The end product within religion are different levels. Again, just like we're created out of different levels, religion is created out of different levels. And just
now we've got a hierarchy.
Like material reality, you have basically an analog between the mineral, the vegetable, the animal, and the human.
Okay, mineral, vegetable, animal, 4 levels, and he's going to have 4 levels of his religion. I've listened to this a couple times now, so I know where he's going. But
the lowest level of religion is just the physical church and the rituals, and you go there and you go through the ritual, and it binds you together with everybody else, right? That's the Durkheimian kind of Jonathan Haidt level of religion. Now the next.
Okay, before he goes there, we're gonna track his religion, and we're gonna follow the diagram. So, okay, Ben's hierarchy of religious values. He places a lot of value on experience, and that's gonna be manifest as he walks through. And again, this came out pretty clear in his conversation with Esther, and we didn't touch on it a lot in my conversation. That's because I'm a sneaky pastor, and this is what I do. He places a lot of value on experience. He's biasing empiricism a bit above rationality, it appears, and he can correct me if I'm wrong. Remember the common post-Reformation dualism in search of certainty, and I just walked through that a little bit earlier in the video. Again, you've got Renaissance humanism, embracing of texts. I mean, the texts that are coming out through the Crusades are coming back into Europe. Europe is settling down politically. Monasticism has kind of been the grasses that keep the soil on the hillside, to use a biological term, keep the soil on the hillside, and now larger plants can start to develop, and they start developing, politically, and universities develop, and everybody's believing in texts. And of course the Protestant Reformation comes kind of at the pinnacle of it, where the text is even above the hierarchy of the church, and you can see that kind of as the pinnacle of this belief in texts. Okay, now this doesn't go well, and I know I'm going to probably be in trouble with a lot of Protestants for some of these things I say, but again, YouTube is a place for people with little to lose. So this doesn't go well. And Luther hopes that, if you want to read more up on this, is it Luther? Protestant's Dangerous Idea by Alistair McGrath is a terrific book on this. And McGrath is a Protestant and is an Anglican. Anglicans are always weird fish. They're not really Roman Catholics, but they're not really Protestants. We can thank Henry VIII for Anglicans, but. But so what happens is texts kind of reach their pinnacle and come crashing down in because pluralism. No, Luther's hoping that, Luther's going to make his argument just like every intellectual. Luther's going to make his argument. Everybody's going, oh, Martin, you're right. That doesn't happen. Karlstadt doesn't agree with him. The Radical Reformation happens. The Anabaptists, they go off in a corner. You have John of Leyden and the whole Munster mess. And on and on and on. And Europe, Europe was a mess before. It continues to be a mess, and Luther doesn't seem to clean it up. And John Calvin comes and, cleans things up a little bit further in terms of the theology, in terms of Calvin's institutes, and people start arguing with the Pope. And Guido de Brès, in the Netherlands, in the Low Country, Belgium, says, King Philip, you shouldn't kill us over this stuff because we're Christians too, won't you acknowledge our Christianity? No! Guido de Brès gets killed, but the Protestants win, and the Netherlands breaks off, and capitalism starts, and Voltaire comes along and says, oh, look, Muslims and Protestants and Catholics can all agree if they make money. Woohoo! And so then philosophy kind of displaces religion. Let's find our certainty in empiricism or rationality. I just ran through this before. Now, Ben seems to be biasing experience, which is empiricism. Now, rationality and empiricism always work hand in hand. As Kant said, again, I'm not going to go through Kant, but look at Philip Carey's stuff. And Ben, of course, embraces skepticism. You practice skepticism as a way of seeing through some things in order to see other things, as C.S. Lewis says. And then Ben says, okay, so here's our hierarchy. We're going to have a hierarchy. So down here we have mundane religious practitioners and mundane religious communities. And we have Durkheim and we have Jonathan Haidt. And you go to church and you believe the cleric and you do your duty and you give them and you give your money and you believe the teaching. And this is kind of baseline broad common religion, and Catholics do it and Protestants do it and Buddhists who actually organize themselves into communities, Buddhists do it, and see American, oh boy, I can get off into, I don't edit, so I have to self-edit as I go through because there's a whole nother rabbit trail. But this is Ben's hierarchy of religious values, and this is the base level of religion. So that's level 1. So let's look at level 2.
This level of religion, of every religion, is the
of every religion. Buddhists have their monasteries, Hindus have their practices, and the guy who lives next door to my church, once or twice a year he has a Hindu thing, and he puts up his flags, and he says, oh, Pastor, he's a very good neighbor. He says, Pastor, can we use our parking lot? I'm going to have some religious things here. And I say, sure. And so then they have lots of cars, and he has his Hindu thing. That's common, mundane religion. That's what people do.
Wisdom traditions, where you begin to employ your mind and ask questions.
Now this is the next level.
What do all these symbols mean? And you begin to initiate a process of developing yourself towards what's at the heart of the religion, if the religion has a heart. And you have to take it in faith that it does. You can't initiate the process of entering into religion without at some point letting go of your skepticism of whether or not you're headed anywhere. But I'm not...
I just preached, I noticed his recent video had a nod to Ecclesiastes. I just preached about Ecclesiastes. I haven't posted the actual sermon yet on my church channel, but I'll do that later on this week. Anyway.
Saying that you give up your skepticism, you aim your skepticism higher. Like, what is the purpose of entering into a relationship with religion? Is to develop yourself, is develop your understanding of the world, develop yourself, and then foster a relationship between you and reality. Foster a relationship between your consciousness and that which is consciousness, let's just say.
Okay, so this is his second level. So now we kind of have, first we have the mundane religious practitioner. That's kind of the base level. That's all the schmucks going to mass and going to church and going to temple and so on and so forth. Then you have the cleric class. And, well, he hasn't really gotten to Esther. Maybe we'll let him play a little bit more.
So the first level of religion is you show up and you go on Christmas, you go on Easter, maybe you go once a month, or you go every Saturday or whatever, like depending on how religious you are. And that's just the fundamentally religious aspect of the church. That's just the brute code of the church. Within that is various forms of meaning, and you initiate a process of asking what does this mean, and you contact people who've been wrestling with different questions and understanding all these symbols as kind of ways of wrestling with deeper questions. So you start to get into contact with these questions, and that's where the apologetics is. And that's where I was pushing Esther, because Esther's at that level, and it's a great level to be. I don't mean to say that it's...
We're Americans, we gotta be sensitive to each other's feelings. Esther's a big girl.
Good or bad wherever she is. I'm just saying she's at that level of, what does this mean? This is what this means. This is why I believe this. This is how this all fits together. Those are all those tools. The question is, what are all those tools for? Are those tools just to replicate those tools in the world? Is that mimetic structure only there to replicate itself in the world? It's not.
And now this is when you get into evangelicalism and evangelicalism's high value on proselytizing. This is the suspicion behind evangelicals and evangelicalism, that all they want to do is grow their market share. That's what evangelicals want to do. When you watch them, they're out on this. There's street preachers that come from Vacaville into Sacramento, because when I see a street preacher and have time, I like to pull off the right side of the road and have a conversation with them. And what I've discovered is that they don't do street preaching in their own city. They don't want to be recognized by the people who live there, but they do their street preaching and have their signs. And so I love stopping and talking to street preachers, because it's really fun. And then, well, usually they try to evangelize. I'm a pastor of a church. Oh, well, you might be the pastor of a wrong kind of church. And again, we have this pluralism thing going on. So maybe you'd be better if pastor, you were a street preacher too, and I'd stand outside in Florin Road with a sign, and or if and I get this in the comment section that, Paul VanderKlay isn't a very good pastor because he's not, actually I get this more in terms of emails that people said, because he's not closing the deal. And he didn't work. When I had my talk to Benjamin, I didn't work really hard to close the deal. And this is the same impulse that when the Super Bowl winning quarterback is on TV after the interview, if he doesn't try and give a gospel witness and he's a Christian right there on TV, he's missed his chance. And that's part of a religious tradition. So there's an aspect of evangelicalism in America that says, if you're on TV, make sure you get that gospel presentation in there. And okay, I understand that. Another part of the culture says, maybe you shouldn't wear your Christianity in just that way. And I think actually there's things to be said for both sides of that. I remember having a conversation with someone about door-to-door stuff, and I was like, well, I'll tell you, when the Jehovah's Witnesses come to my door, it makes me less want to really find them credible. And then another person in the room said, yeah, but I became a Christian because someone came to my door. And it's like, yeah, there's always upsides and downsides to all these things.
There is a purpose within all of this stuff. And that's my claim. And that's my understanding. That's been my reality, is that there's a purpose. There's something that's animating all this stuff. And the special thing about being a human being is initiating a process of developing yourself, of coming into contact with all your faults, and initiating in the process of becoming harmonized, of developing.
Okay, now here's the funny thing. And again, as a pastor, one of the things you do as a pastor is you learn to listen carefully to key words, because these key words are tells, they're ties to deeper cultural things that harmonize. So we hear underneath this the struggle with pluralism and the hope of using scientific methods to transcend religious pluralism. And this is embedded in the Jordan Peterson project as well. This is deeply embedded in a lot of projects, because we're disturbed by this pluralism, because now we can look at it as a sociological frame, because pluralism indicates to us that maybe we have not fully arrived at truth. Okay? So what we're looking for is harmony, and what we're looking for is for us to all be able to agree, like the way we can agree that, boy, if we do electrolysis on water, we'll get hydrogen and oxygen coming out of it. We want that level of certainty, but then I always turn it another turn and say, why do we want that level of certainty? Because if we can take the world, again, if you read C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, that's where he goes in those little 3 chapters. If we can, and this is where Dostoevsky goes with his piano keys, if we can reduce the world to splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen, well, now we've got desire. Now we're knocking on Augustine's door. Now, if we can reduce people to technology, then what? Then my vision of the good can dominate. Now we've got the Ring of Sauron. And what Lewis points out is exactly that, because there's a circle here. And this is the circle I always see when Brett Weinstein talks about this stuff. We're going to transcend our robot program. Okay. What program will you use? Well, we're going to use the moral program. Okay. Where do you get your morality from? It just keeps winding down. You get your morality from somewhere. And it's the same issue you have, let's say, in American politics. What American politics does is divinize a process. Say, this is the process. We're going to have this constitution. We're going to divinize this constitution. And you just have to play by the rules. And if you play by the rules, then it's fair. Then everything will be okay. But we always have the question, well, who's going to decide? Who can we trust? And I always trust me more than I trust anyone else. Sometimes I don't even trust me because, yeah, I've seen what I do with my life. I'm pastor of a small church. I'm not a success.
As a human being and developing as a creature, created, and as a co-creator in this world.
We get a little Tolkien coming in here. Sub-creators.
And an inspired co-creator. So,
inspired co-creator. See, that's why I listen to people talk, because we have these little tells, and we tell each other where we're from. And if you know enough of the background, you can follow these tells to find out how did that fall into the flooded river, and what is traveling downstream with us.
Eventually, all that second level of religion is for what? You become a minister, you become a priest, you devote your life to it, you understand all this stuff, you're a really wise person, you're really good, you can take care of people, you're interacting with society great, you understand how to translate all this code into something that's applicable into everybody's life, right? You become a master, you become a doctorate. There's this other level.
Okay, so let's finish up the second level. So here's the second level. So the first level is the mundane religious practitioner. The second level is the cleric class. So you graduate and you become a minister like me. And then you become really wise and good, and you help homeless people, and you're nice to people and all of that stuff. And, you know, pastors are quivering masses of availability. And they want to ride Jordan Peterson's coattails up into church growth and fame, like VanderKlay, and on and on and on. And so, okay, we got these two classes, and so I guess that me and Esther, we've leveled up, baby. You know, she's doing her apologetics. We're thinking, we're arguing, we're promoting. We're cleric class. But there's another level. Whoops.
So. And this is the level of revelation. This is the level of experience. And this experience, there's tons of stories about this, right? But that's eventually kind of like the hope of everybody who initiates this process, is that you will get your own revelation. You will be able to have your own experience of this stuff and no longer need to rely on the tradition itself. You can begin to you begin to let go of those training wheels and to have initiate a process of becoming in and of yourself a person of God, or somebody who is connected to God. And that next stage is beyond the heart and the mind. It's after you get to a state of being a good person, right? And then but you still have to surrender your consciousness. You have to let go of all the thinking and all the feeling and the wanting and the desiring, right? And there's different ways of training yourself to do that. In my own understanding, there's a very minute split here in the mystic traditions that I can't really get into, because it's going to launch me into a whole host of questions and stuff that I have encrusted in literature, because I think mythology is the best way to talk about this stuff, because I'm always going to be stepping on everybody's ideas about this stuff. But there's a way of initiating that process of having religious experience, and you can do it through the material means. You can do it through drugs, which is
Now remember, he's got his material, plant, animal, human. He's got that hierarchy he's working on too.
Using the lower to achieve the higher, which does do something. There is a place for that, for sure. But the drugs itself will again, it will hijack. Just like anybody who's talking about this stuff, there's always a capacity that which is connecting you with a greater understanding of things can actually hijack your understanding. Just like me. My memes want to ride on you and replicate. Of course, there's always that replication crisis going on. That religious experience can be gotten to by various different means, through material means such as LSD, through vegetable means such as psilocybin, through animal means by initiating a process of chanting, and using your body and synchronizing your body and entering into an ecstatic state, through human means, which is a mimetic structure such as incantations or various different sorts of meditations or mental constructs that you use to do that. And then there's something else.
Okay. So we've got the third layer, which is the mystic class. So we have the mundane religious practitioner, we have the cleric class, and we have the mystic class. And this is Jung. I don't believe, I know. I've seen for myself. I've had the experience. I've been to the mountaintop. I've done the psilocybin. I've deconstructed my personhood, and I've done this through, you can do it through psychedelics, you can do it through meditation, you can do it through chanting. Maybe you're a Pentecostal and you went to this worship conference and you had the best worship leader on stage and the whole crowd was there and we were all singing together and our hearts were open, or maybe the pastor came down and bang, you got smoted and you fell on the floor and this rush came over you and you had this experience of light and goodness and beauty, or maybe you had a near-death experience and you had a medical emergency and bang, you were in the tunnel of light and now you're not believing, you're not rationing your way up there, you're not reasoning based on the revelation of others, you're having your own revelation. And so then this is a level up. So we have the mundane, we have the cleric class, we have the mystic class, but we got a fourth speed. I'm really kind of curious about the car that he's in too, because I keep looking and trying to think, is that a Subaru? Is it I don't know. We'll find out.
There's something else that's beyond the heart and mind, but it takes place in the body. It takes place in the matter. It takes place in the mind, right? And for some people, it'll be a song. Or some people, it'll be a tremor in your hand. You'll feel an energy, or you'll begin to dance. And the difference between this experience and the other experiences is that it initiates from inside. It's spontaneous, and you know it's real because it is spontaneous. It doesn't come through.
You know it's real because it's spontaneous. That's something you're going to want to really think about, because we're formed, and
anything outside of you. It doesn't come through a concentration or through an incantation. It comes about spontaneously.
See, I would assert here that what's floating down the river here is the secret, sacred self. And this is not unlike the person that says, well, I now know that I really am the reincarnation of Shirley Temple. Now, I might look like a very large, middle-aged Dutch white man, but I really am the reincarnation of Shirley Temple. I know this. Now, what would be in it for me to be the reincarnation of Shirley Temple? Maybe I'd rather be the reincarnation of Howard Hughes and try to lay claim on his fortune, now how many generations passed. But this is the secret sacred self. Now, the problem that you have with the secret sacred self is we already know we're formed. And so often when, again, being a pastor, you have these experiences where someone comes up to you and says, I'm spiritual but not religious. Like, ah! And you're like, yeah, I know. Everybody thinks that. And it's just like high school, because They're all their own unique, sacred, secret selves, and they're all expressing and coming out right now, and here it's new, and it's like, yeah, it's new to you, and the high school teachers are like, yeah, you're someone else now. We're formed, and the things that come up from inside of us, how do you know that isn't formed too? And that's the problem with the question of formation. We know we're formed. The assertion that we're a closed system is nothing more than an assertion. We don't know.
And that is the power of God. That is the Holy Spirit.
See, it's the secret, sacred self.
There's the Ro Ilof. There's tons of the Brahman. There's so many names for this stuff. And that's at the heart, and that's the third level. The third level of religious experiences, that's where we get to the mystical traditions. And those are in the heart of every religion. And those are pathways towards individual recognition of yourself as an individual created by God.
And see, at this point, we're at 14, 16 into it, and I'm thinking, do you remember what you said with your worldview section about the energies? And so, and again, I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but I'm just talking out loud. And this is the kind of things that if he and I were in my office and we were having this conversation, I'd say, now wait a minute, before you said this, now you're saying this. You're gonna want to take those two things and put them side by side and say, well, what does that mean?
Though with faults, maybe I'll wrap up with the faults, but let me get to that fourth stage of religion is something you don't need to worry about. We don't need to worry about that. It doesn't even really make sense to even talk about this level, but there is another level that we can just...
That's kind of the esoteric thing that floated down the river. Well, we get to this point, we can't even talk about it. Now, there's truth to that, because there are things you can't talk about, because we are limited in our capacity to articulate, but we're still going to talk about it.
Indicate that it's there. And that's the level where every aspect of your being, every movement that you make, every feeling that you have, every thought that you speak is infused and is guided by the divine spirit. You become...
See now the divine spirit came in, and we don't know where that came from at the beginning. And so this is what theology does, and this is what disciplines do, and this is what religions do, where we come in and we say, okay, you got all these elements here, and now let's put them all on the table and ask, well, how do they all fit together? Where do they come from? What are they? Well, and see, this is the difficulty that you have with something like this, is that in a sense, by virtue of your hierarchy, you've taken those things off the table. You say, well, that's at a layer I can't articulate. Okay. Well, then why are we talking? Because in order for us to articulate, we're going to have to put it on the table, and we're going to have to talk about it. And in a sense, you're saying, well, this is beyond us having a conversation. Okay, well, I understand that there are things beyond us having a conversation, but we are having a conversation. And where can we locate it? And I understand that you can have an experience, and after that experience, you say, there's nothing that I can say that can adequately encapsulate and communicate that experience. And I say, yeah, well, that's not uncommon. If I have a wonderful meal and you say, well, describe for me that omelet that, let's say the Stagecoach, right down Florin Road, John Van Donk and I often eat at the Stagecoach. Encapsulate for me that omelet that you ate at the Stagecoach. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, articulate it for me so that I can have the same experience of eating the omelet that you can. I can't do that. I cannot put into words exactly what that means. Now, I might describe the egg and the sausage and the bacon and the green pepper and the cheese and the biscuits and gravy, and because you've had that experience, you can kind of associate, say, yeah, I know what you're talking about. But let's say you've never had breakfast at the Stagecoach. Words cannot convey that experience. Now, just because I can't encapsulate that in words doesn't mean that the experience of eating an omelet with biscuits and gravy over at the Stagecoach down Florin Road is somehow higher up on the hierarchy. There are many things in life that are ineffable. It's not a unique thing. Now, in terms of going down to the stagecoach, you can go down to the stagecoach and you can have that omelet, and probably done by the same cook. It won't be exactly the same omelet, but it'll be close enough. Now, giving the pragmatists their due, it'll be close enough that after you eat it, you say, now I know what you're talking about. Now the stagecoach with their ambiance and all the stuff that's going on over there at the stagecoach in Florin Road, I know what you're talking about because I too have had that experience. Yeah, but your experience and my experience wasn't really all that similar too, because now we're getting back into Kant and Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, I brought stuff to that experience that you didn't bring to that experience because I have this whole trail of experiences behind me. So at this stage, this move is a little bit, I look at this move and I say, we got to talk about this a little bit more, because you can have an experience. Okay, let's say I go to the Pentecostal Bible Barn, and we have the guitarist. I go to Bayside Church up in Granite Bay, and you have the guitarist who used to play with Journey, and he's up there and he's leading worship, and he's an amazing worship leader. And you've got 5,000 people in the auditorium, and the smoke machine is going, and the big thing, and we're singing about Jesus, and I grew up with Jesus, and boy, bang, there I am. Can I describe that experience? Is that experience from God? See, this is where I think, the religious were formed. Now, is that experience not from God? Well, and this is where I'll often sit down with people who have been downstream from evangelicalism, and they'll say things like, that's a God thing. And I say, yes, as opposed to what? The trees? The squirrels? Yosemite National Park? Walk into Yosemite. I love going to Yosemite, and I love sitting there and watching the tour bus let out, and all of these tourists from all over the world, and they walk into Yosemite Valley, and Yosemite's a God thing. Well, what do I mean by that? Was it made by glaciers? Yeah. The God of redemption is the God of creation, is the God of experience, is the God of all of it. It's all a God thing. The stuff in the soup, the glory of soup, that's a God thing. Are there things we can't articulate? Yes. Well, the fact that we can prompt them, let's say, with psilocybin and have a mystical experience. See, that's in a sense where Jordan Peterson, that's the traction he's getting in his natural theology right there. But we got to watch our assumptions between these things. I say, boy, that omelet at the stagecoach was ineffable. And then someone will say, yeah, but it was just a really good cook. Yeah, but the glory, now we're getting into the neo-sacramentalism. The glory is built into that omelet. The glory is built into that eggs. The glory is built into that tradition of making omelets. The glory is built into the ambiance and the uniqueness of that dumpy little place down Florin Road. The glory is built into the owners and all that they brought to it. The glory is built into this long stream. And the glory is built into the fact that I grew up in Patterson with African Americans, and we go to Mama Lou's for the most amazing Southern cooking you could imagine, and on and on and on and on and on, Aunt Lou's, just on and on. And so then when I go into the stagecoach, I have this ineffable experience. I remember in the Dominican Republic once we were hosting a Haitian pastor in our home, and my wife thought, well, we want to esteem this Haitian pastor as an honored guest, and so my wife decided she was going to make a lasagna. We were living in the Dominican Republic, and finding all the ingredients for a lasagna was not easy, and she had to, we can't usually get the ricotta cheese that we usually make our lasagnas from in the States, so then we have to use this other queso in the Dominican Republic, so we had to swap out things, and so my wife was really happy about putting this lasagna together so she could offer it to this Haitian pastor. And the Haitian pastor tasted it and was kind of like, I didn't like lasagna. He's like, how could you not like lasagna? We're formed. The Haitian had different ideas of what was delicious by virtue of where he grew up. And also individual idiosyncrasies and so on and so on and so forth. But this is This is how cultures work. This is how pluralism works. This is how diversity works.
Essentially an instrument that God is playing in the world, right? And so, like, that's prophet level. You don't need to worry about that.
Okay, well, let's get to prophet level then. So prophet level. And, well, he's about to say more, so let's let him say more.
I mean, it'd be great if you go there, but, like, to be honest, you probably don't want to go there, because that means that you have to give up all the things that you really want. And I don't mean, like, just give up on life. I mean, give up on the desires, give up on your selfish desires, give up on treating people badly, give up on not taking care of yourself. You have to actually start to surrender more and more of what forms you as you. And let's wrap up here.
So that's prophet level. This is where you have to give up the hard stuff. Ben, I'm laughing because I'm enjoying this, okay? I do mean no disrespect. And the fact that you put this out on YouTube, to me, says it's game for conversation. And, you know, I don't want to... You're a big boy. I think you can handle this. So, the reason I love this video is I've not heard this for the first time from Ben. I hear this all the time. And why? Because this is built into our cultural assumptions about what religion is and how it works. That, well, if you're at prophet class as opposed to mystic class or cleric class, if you're at prophet class, you see some gaming in there too. If you're at prophet class, well then, you know, then you have to do stuff like love your enemies. Then you have to do stuff like celibacy. Then you have to do stuff like not being mean to people. I guess I'm not prophet class. I still haven't gotten over that. But this is a hierarchy of religion, and this is how it's put together. Now, and make some observations here. You see, Charles Taylor, if you want to actually try to read A Secular Age, this massive book, you see Charles Taylor's observation about religious speeds, and I've mentioned this before, and some of you liked it, and some of you don't. Protestant Reformation wanted one speed instead of two, and Charles Taylor's background is Roman Catholic. Okay, so he's not. I don't think he's being unfair to his tribe. Others have said, yeah, you know, the Roman Catholic Church wants all of us to be holy too. Yeah, and so I'm not taking any of that away, but this is a big emphasis in the Reformation, and this was part of the reform that the reformers want. And this is part of what made, let's say, John Calvin's Geneva what it was, because the goal was to have a holy city. And this is what sent the Pilgrims across the Atlantic to found Plymouth, because they were utopians in some ways. They wanted to establish a holy city. And this is part of the reason why, well, you have Rhode Island and John Williams, who differed from the Pilgrims and then the Puritans, because first the Pilgrims came over and then the Puritans came over, and the Pilgrims were in a sense a higher speed version than the Puritans. The Pilgrims were the super athletes of their particular religious tradition. They were higher up on the hierarchy, and they weren't compromising like the Puritans, and the Puritans weren't compromising like the other Anglicans, and the Anglicans weren't compromising, well, we'll get into Henry VIII and everything, but you know, so you have all these levels and you have these speeds, and essentially in Charles Taylor's idea about speeds is that you have the monks who are in the monastery and they're praying for the regular people. So in a sense, you're going back to this. You have mundane religious practitioners, then you have the cleric class, and so you have these multi-speed religions, and that's kind of what is implicit in Benjamin's religious value, you know, religious hierarchy of religious value here, that you have these different speeds, and so you have the prophet class and the mystic class and the cleric class. Part of what you have to wrestle with when you deal with Christianity is that shot through the religion, and I wasn't really, it was this commentary a number of years ago. Part of the reason I like preaching through books, and here's a fat book too. This is Joel Green. Joel Green was a scholar. I don't know if he's retired or anything. He was at Fuller Seminary in Southern California, And he wrote this commentary, New International Commentary of the New Testament and the Gospel of Luke. That book. And one of the things that this turned me on to for the first time late in the game for me was how shot through Luke is with questions of status. And that kind of sent me down a journey of reading the New Testament with new eyes, paying much more attention to status. And what I began to notice is that built into Christianity are a lot of really interesting and complicated conversations about status, which is hierarchy, and equality. And we're still playing through them today. This social justice warrior culture war business, this is all about equality and status. And you're not getting rid of either. And so the question is to figure out, how do these two systems interact? Okay? And I've mentioned before, and I should probably do a video on it, the relationship, there's bounded set and there's center set systems. All right? Some of you are familiar with this language. Bounded set says the true Christian, let's talk about Christian Reformed history. The true Christian doesn't eat out on Sunday. The true Christian doesn't get the newspaper on Sunday. When I was growing up, my parents didn't get the Sunday paper. I don't know, it was because they were poor and didn't have any money, or it was their Sabbatarianism, but they didn't get the Sunday paper. And as a kid, I always felt kind of gypped because, the Sunday paper had the comics in color and we didn't watch TV on Sunday, except we could watch TV after church, The Wonderful World of Disney, after church. But that meant we didn't get to see the World's Strongest Man competition. We didn't get to watch football. And all these things we didn't get to do when we were growing up in the VanderKlay household, and my parents were religious. And so we didn't get the Sunday paper, and we didn't watch TV on Sunday. Did that make us prophet class? I don't know. We didn't get these things, and the Martins got to watch TV on Sunday, so when we'd go over to their house after church, they weren't even in the same church, we'd get to watch World's Strongest Man competition on ABC, and I thought that was really cool. And they got the Sunday paper, so I could see the comics in color. And other people at Northside, because a lot of black folks going there, they didn't have all the CRC Sabbatarian traditions, they were getting the Sunday paper, and I'd look at their Sunday paper and I'd think, kind of want to look at that, but I kind of feel guilty for looking on that because I didn't get the Sunday paper. And then, of course, later on, after I went to college, my parents started getting the Sunday paper, and it's like, you compromisers, readers of the colored comics on Sunday. And I remember the first time we went to a restaurant on Sunday, and it was like, we lost our prophet class. So you have all these speeds, and you have all these hierarchies, and Christianity has all these status and equality conversations built into them. And I'm going to go into those a little bit in some of the verses I'm going to read. Jesus clearly articulates a value hierarchy of rewards in the age to come. He says that all over and over again. And so people who give up stuff will surely be more than compensated in this age and the age to come, Jesus says. And it's like, oh, so there is a hierarchy. And then Jesus says things that are just so completely egalitarian, it changes the world. Oh, so we're all brothers. I'm going to read that in a minute. So there's, throughout the gospel, there's all these really complex, I was talking about boundary set and center set. Sorry, I distracted myself. So boundary set says you don't read the Sunday comics, you don't get the newspaper on Sunday, you don't go out to eat on Sunday. These are all the boundary set that shows you are prophet class, Christian Reformed person before the great falling away of the 1980s in the Christian Reformed Church. That's how you know. You know you're really Christian Reformed if your mother cooks the meal on Saturday, so even she doesn't have to work on Sunday. That's how you have status. That's bounded set by these fixed things. Now, center set says, well, there's a pole in the middle, and it's whether you're moving towards the pole or moving away from the pole. So kind of what the Christian Reformed Church said is, well, you can go out to eat on Sunday, but, maybe if you're speaking in tongues, or maybe if you're believing in women in church office, or maybe if you have black friends, or maybe if, so there are these poles that represent value, and if you're moving towards these poles, well, it's the direction. And a lot of people say, well, there's bounded set and there's center set. All right. The more I thought about this, I said, no, actually the bounded set and the center set are both part of the same system, because those boundary markers move depending on where the center is. And we're not always real sure of what the gravity is around the center and how they're pulling, but it's much more of a dynamic situation. And that's in a sense similar to the status and the hierarchy, status and hierarchy in one sense, inequality in the other sense. And so then when you listen to a lot of what Jesus says, and I'm going to read a whole bunch of verses in a little bit, you begin to get the sense that Jesus is moving around the boundaries and he's moving around the center. And he's doing this in really complicated ways that get even more complicated when you get into different cultures, because that means you're going to have to figure this stuff out. Well, now we're back at the cleric class, because that's what the clerics do. And see, what I'm going to want to do is mess with his entire hierarchy. So Jesus clearly articulates value hierarchy of the reward in the age to come. But there's often an inversion dynamic in that too. The least are the greatest. The last will be first. Poor will be rich. The meek will inherit the earth. This little spat that I had with Jordan Peterson quite a few months ago was a friendly spat. So I'm going to read some Bible verses. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. This is after Jesus' resurrection. Very famous story from the Gospel of John. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord. We have had direct experience with Jesus. We saw him with our own little eyeballs." Okay? These were nice, naive world of objects. I'm seeing what's real. I saw Jesus. Ain't no doubt about the resurrection here. But Thomas says, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where his nails were and put my hands into his side, I will not believe." Seeing is believing. Well, setting this up. A week later, his disciples were in the house again. Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Hey, yo, Tom, I heard what you said about me. Come on over here. Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." What's VanderKlay doing? Is VanderKlay being an evangelical? Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." It's a big thing for a Jew to say in the first century. Call a man his God? That kind of stuff will get you stoned. Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and have yet believed." That kind of throws this into a little bit of confusion. And it's not hard to understand, because for the mystic or the prophet who have had amazing revelations, or the cleric who's been using reason based on other revelations, the mundane religious practitioner who's going to work every day and yet practices sacrificially, giving up hard stuff, even though they haven't had those revelations. Jesus says that's on the top of the prior, that's on the top of the hierarchy. They haven't had those great revelations, but yet they're being faithful. They're being faithful to their spouse. They're being faithful to their community. They're being generous to their church. That's faith. See, what you've done is you've just flipped the hierarchy. Matthew 23. Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat." They have status. "So you must be careful to do everything they tell you." You should submit and do what they tell you. "But do not do what they do." Well, for they do not practice what they preach. They're hypocrites. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. There's issues with the cleric class here. Everything they do is done for people to see. That's like VanderKlay riding Jordan Peterson's coattails. They make their phylacteries wide and their tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogue. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others. Oh, VanderKlay loves his status. You know, he goes to a meetup and has people want to take selfies with him and all this stuff. But VanderKlay, you should see how dirty his office is. Look, take a look at this. Look at this. His table's a mess. There's crap on his desk. He's using that crappy old computer because the other one broke. He's even got a little mess behind him. VanderKlay's a hypocrite. Yeah, VanderKlay's a hypocrite. Take it from me. I know a hypocrite when I see one. Look at one in the mirror every day. But you are not to be called rabbi, reverend, pastor. For you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you must be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And notice, that's the future. Jesus is saying something's going to come, something's going to happen. Now part of Benjamin's hierarchy here was, and this again is expressive of the current secularism, that, well, the secular frame in which we now exist, normal time, secular time, is the foundational, only enduring frame. Now again, if you read Charles Taylor in The Secular Age, he deconstructs this to a degree and says, that's an assumption. And people have been playing with time in a lot of different ways throughout the course of humanity. So the fact that you look out and say there's just secular time, there's no second coming, there's only secular time. Well, that's a function actually of a scientific worldview, but it's an assumption. You can't evaluate it. You don't know it's true. It's like asking, what was before the singularity and the Big Bang? Can't answer that question. You, by virtue of science, you can't answer that question. You can talk about it. You can think about it. You can talk about a multiverse. You can talk about the inverse of there was the bizarro universe that kind of got flipped, just kind of like the poles on the magnetic poles on the planet. Blah, blah, blah. You don't know. We don't know. Luke 22. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them." Well, how does God feed them? Well, God feeds them through the trees. God feeds them through the plants. God feeds them through the natural processes. Well, then what is God? And what is God's relationship to those trees and those seeds and those plants and those dead carcasses that birds are swooping in and eating up? And how much more valuable are you than birds? Are we more valuable than birds? Or are we just more evolved birds that have these big left brains? Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? I don't know. Don't worry or survive. Isn't it our worry that makes us, what movie was it? There was a coward. I forget what it was, but hey, being a coward keeps you alive sometimes. Running away from danger, running into burning buildings, bad idea. Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Well, that is a good question. Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. What are you saying? God is growing the wildflowers? Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of them. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink, and do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock. It's a diminutive. For your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. I thought that's the thing that we're seeking. Yeah, we are. It's also a gift. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. The age of decay doesn't take it from you. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Well, what's your heart? Well, it's the center of you. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am a resounding gong and a clanging cymbal. Cleric class values. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, well, that's prophet class and mystic class. But do not have love, I am nothing. Yeah, but mundane Christians, they have love. Mothers have love. Neighbors have love. Children have love. God spreads his gifts liberally throughout the world against many of our tribes. If I give all I possess to the poor, you just saw, well, sell your possessions and give stuff to the poor. Doesn't that put you at the hierarchy? But if you do that, if you do it motivated to be put at the top of the hierarchy, if I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that's prophet class stuff. That I may boast, I'm a prophet, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Oh, well, who's distributing these rewards and punishments anyway? So love is at the top of the hierarchy? Yeah. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Boy, if you live like that, yeah, it's gonna be hard. Because loving like that kind of love gets you dead. Love never fails. What does that mean? But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, in the speech of angels, they'll be stilled. Where there is knowledge, oh, cleric class, big reason, big head, it'll pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. You mean even these visions that I have, even these words that I can articulate, even this stuff that when I say it, everyone stops and says, wow. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. Yeah, we don't really spend too much time on old textbooks and old science because it's been subsumed. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. Ooh. You want to be a hypocrite on that day, not like VanderKlay. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Well, here's the thing. Where is love in here? It's right there at the bottom. Love is, if you're a parent and your child vomits in the middle of the night, getting up in the middle of the night and reassuring that child, you're okay. Give them a little medicine, change the sheets. It's changing it's the nursing home worker changing the adult diaper. It's the nurse. It's the guy doing the dirty jobs. It's love. And where's love on this thing? That's what Paul says. That's an inversion of this hierarchy. And we all know it. That's what's funny. But we should inform our religious systems that it's that way. So I'll end with a little pastoral advice, because this is what I do. If you've got a big left brain, you'd better make your peace with it. And this is what Ben is doing. So I love this video. I love this video. And I hope nothing I've said here takes anything away from this video, because he's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing in working through this stuff. And he's giving us all a gift by working through it in public. And there's risk in that, because then, you know, hypocrites like me are going to make a video about it and critique some things and criticize some things and but some things. And it's no fun having someone poke around when you've just taken yourself and put yourself out there. You have some nosy pastor come and poke through it and say, yes, no. So everything I've said here, you have to understand that this is what I'm doing. I mean nothing by it. This is part of a process. And the fact that what he put out with the disclaimers he put out, I think he understands that process. So those of you who in the comment section are really gonna, oh, you're not being fair to Ben, you know, way to go, Team Ben. I want Team Ben to have a strong team. I want Team Ben to have loyal supporters who send him money on Patreon or PayPal or Bitcoin or however this thing is going to sort itself out. Ben's a great guy. Go Team Ben. This is part of the process. This is how we talk things through. And this is how we work on things. So VanderKlay is all wet. VanderKlay's a hypocrite. Write a long comment. Absolutely. Unsubscribe if it's too much for you. No problem. This is what we do. Thinking out loud and sharing your process and your journey is a blessing to others who share the same asset and liability of the big left brain. It's what we do. It's fun. It's good. It's great. I love it. Be careful with your hierarchies. They're really tough to maintain because the world is really complicated. We certainly project and reflect as well as observe and articulate. Ben, when I talked to Ben, he talked about his day job, and he mentions it in this video where he takes care of children. To me, there's one of those dirty jobs that exudes love. And when he talks about how he cares for these children, why? It's love. And you know what I say? That's at the top of your hierarchy. Are you saying I shouldn't make videos and read philosophy? And no, do all that stuff too. Definitely. I love it. That's great. But probably the most important thing you're doing is loving those little children. Why? That's at the top of the hierarchy. Why? Because people matter to God. As does squirrels, as does trees, as does this world, as does the universe as we know it. It matters to God. But people are special. So, love those little children. Take good care of them. Glad you're visiting your family or your girlfriend or wherever you're driving down for. Maybe you're doing interviews, I don't know. It's in these low-status places where God so often meets us. It's in the mundane. It's in the crappy little church that has messed up theology and screwed up people and can't do anything right. Oh, little flock. It's God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. We think of monks in the religious hierarchy as kind of second speed religious athletes. And this is where I'll critique this 1 speed, 2 speed. Again, almost everything you say you can critique. The world is just that complex. Because the monasteries were a container to allow ordinary people to do mundane things to bless the world in small, quiet ways. And it wasn't just their saving of manuscripts that allowed Europe to transcend the great falling away after the collapse of the Roman Empire. It was the embodiment of Christianity in people taking care of children, in people taking care of farmland, in people taking care of animals, in people loving one another. The home isn't much different from the monastery, nor are many of the places that we take for granted. From time to time, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord. You're way too important for that." He said, "This will never happen to you. We won't let it happen." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." If you read the few verses before, he just said, Peter's the rock upon which he's going to build his church. Now he turns around and calls him Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Jesus and your hierarchies, you don't let them go, but you don't let them dominate. You keep messing with them. You keep messing with them. That he who is on top goes all the way to the bottom and gets abused by unspiritual, unworthy, unrighteous people. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves. This is prophet class. This is basic. Must deny themselves, take up their crosses, and follow me. It requires no history. Every time, if you're working in a daycare and that parent comes in and makes silly demands that are actually counterproductive to the child and rakes you through the coals, and you sit there and you take it, you're bearing a cross. You can bear lots of crosses in your life. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me, what does that mean? Will find it. Don't you mean secure it? Don't you mean grasp it with both hands? Or find it? There it is. It's a surprise. It's a gift. What good will it do for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul, their psyche, their self? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul or their psyche or their self? For the Son of Man, read Daniel 7, is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they've done. So, keep at it, Ben. I love what you're doing. And I hope you understand my little offering today. 2 hours worth for a 20-minute video when I played half of it. I hope you understand my little offering today in the spirit in which it's given. It's a spirit of love. It's a spirit of encouragement. It's a spirit of, you want to say VanderKlay's all wet. You want to say VanderKlay's full of it. You want to do all that. Go right ahead, baby. I probably am. But this is what we do, and this is how we love each other, and this is how we think through these things with our big left brains, and this is how God does wonderful things in this world, and he makes glory, and he changes us and transforms us and creates in us creatures the likes of which clean, dirty diapers and no theology. Just Google Labrie, not Labrie. It's a community where what's his name? It's the Dutch Roman Catholic. Henry Nouwen cares for the disabled, along with others. Yeah, Henry Nouwen, writer of many books, brilliant, smart, Dutch, Roman Catholic, gay, cares for the disabled. It says, this is the greatest work I've ever done. Our hierarchies, they're so funny. God bless you.